Hi everyone, welcome back to my kitchen. I'm some guy who thinks he can cook, and today we'll be making one of my favorite recipes, chicken with a vinegar sauce. Now, when I first discovered this dish a few years ago, it's actually one of the things that inspired me to begin taking cooking a lot more seriously. This multi-step recipe involves a lot of really interesting yet attainable techniques, and the resulting dinner is very satisfying. Now, depending on where you look, there are a lot of different ways to cook this dish. What we'll be taking a look at today is the recipe that I've developed and honed over the years, and the one that I know will produce the best results. Alright, let's jump right in and take a look at what we'll need as far as ingredients go. Being a chicken dish, the first thing that we'll need is the chicken itself. Here, I'll be using 4 bone-in chicken thighs. You can use whatever you'd like. However, I would suggest getting something with the bones in it still, because that's going to be important to developing the flavor of our sauce. The rest of our ingredients can be broken into 2 different parts: the aromatics and the sauce components. So to make our vinegar sauce, we'll need several different things. We'll need about 2 glasses of a white wine. Here, I'm using a Cabernet Sauvignon. You can also use a Pinot Grigio, just make sure it's something on the fruitier, more acidic side. We're not really trying to go for any oaky flavors right now. Additionally, we'll need about a cup of red wine vinegar, as well as several tablespoons of tomato paste. For our aromatics, we'll be using some garlic, an onion, and shallots. Today I'll be using a white onion. Since there will be a lot of sweetness developed elsewhere in the dish, I want something a bit more astringent than a yellow onion. Additionally, for our herbs, we'll be using some parsley, sage, and tarragon. To finish off the sauce, we'll also be needing some chicken stock, as well as some heavy cream, and like any good dish, we'll also be using some butter, pepper, and salt. Alright, let's jump over to the stove and take a look at the first steps to make this. Another thing that we'll want to keep in mind while making this dish is our pan choice. Tonight, I'll be cooking using a 14-inch high-sided sauté pan. It's important that you get something with steep sides, but that isn't too tall. We will be building a sauce in this pan, but we also want to make sure there's plenty of room for the excess water to evaporate out of our sauce. Something like this with the lid is going to be perfect. The very first thing that we'll want to do is take a few tablespoons of butter in our pan over medium-ish heat. Get that butter in there and let it melt a little bit, start to coat the pan. And then, once our butter has begun to melt a little, the next thing we want to do is add our chicken. Now, we're not looking to actually cook the chicken here. We just wanted to get a very light color, just barely start to turn white on the outside. We'll start skin side down. We'll leave it in for a few minutes cooking over this gentle heat, and then flip the birds before removing them. So here, I'll just add these to the pan. And you don't want to be hearing any sizzling or any loud noises at the moment. This is just a gentle cooking to give these a nice blonde color before we move on to the next steps. Now, when I say cooked lightly, this is the type of color that I'm talking about. These chicken thighs are still about 90% raw, and this is exactly where we want them. So now, I'll take these out of the pan, and I'll set these aside for now and let them rest. Once these are all out of the pan, we'll begin prepping our veggies and start building our sauce right here in this butter and rendered chicken fat. for our veggies, I took half the onion and I diced it rather fine. 2 shallots diced fine as well, along with about 4 cloves of garlic sliced pretty thin. We're back here at the stove over medium-ish heat. I'm just going to add all of these to our pan. Give that a little shake, make sure everything's coated in butter, and I'll be sauteing these very lightly for about 5-10 minutes. We just want to sweat these vegetables. We don't want to get any color on them just yet. So for now, just keep an eye on these, and once they start looking a bit translucent, we'll move on to the next steps. Once our veggies begin to look like this, we'll know that our sweat is done. You'll see that they've lightened up a bit and developed a slight bit of caramelization, but they aren't burnt, they aren't crunchy, they're still very soft and tender. The next thing we want to do is take a few tablespoons of that tomato paste and just add that right into the pan. Be sure to stir it in thoroughly, integrating it pretty well with all the vegetables. We want to cook this on about medium heat for several minutes just to begin to remove that sharp raw tomato taste. Once it's all mixed in and cooked, we can begin moving on to the next parts of the dish. Once our tomato paste has cooked for several minutes and gotten a few shades darker, next we can add in our cup of red wine vinegar. Just pour that directly in over the top, and we can turn the heat up to medium-high because we want this to reduce until it's almost a very thick, syrupy consistency. So it'll take a few minutes on high, but first we want to make sure to get that very nice and stirred in, mixed with our tomato sauce so nothing burns. And then we'll just let this go for a little while. Once our vinegar mixture has reached this very thick consistency, this is when we're going to want to add our wine. So I'll go ahead and I'll dump in our first glass. Pour a second. And in the pan that goes. You want to make sure to stir this in very well. Bring this back up to a boil and simmer it for about 3 or 4 minutes. We don't want to reduce the wine too much, but we do want to cook off a bit of that more bright alcohol taste. Unfortunately, because I forgot to hit record, you missed what I just did there, but I added about a cup of our chicken stock, as well as several sprigs of sage and some tarragon to our pan, and now I'm slowly bringing that back up to a boil. Now that we're here though, the next step for our chicken is actually to go back into the pan. So we'll add all of our chicken back in. And from here, we can see that our liquid doesn't quite cover them up yet. So take the rest of our chicken stock and add that in. You want the liquid to be most of the way up the sides of the chicken. So, now that our chicken is reintroduced into the liquid, we want to bring this back up to a boil and let it simmer until it's cooked, which for these pieces I expect should be about 20 to 25 minutes over a low heat. And of course, we'll also want to take our lid and cover this while the chicken is cooking. And from here, we can begin working on the next steps while this stays on the stove. Our chicken has been simmering for about 25 minutes now and is fully cooked. What we want to do now is take the chicken back out of our pan and set it aside for a second time so that we can actually finish working on the sauce. So I'll just remove all 4 of our pieces. And now with our chicken all out of the pan, we want to bring the stove up to medium-high heat and let this reduce very rapidly. We want this to reduce by maybe 1/2 to even 2/3 until there's only a bit of liquid left in the pan. Now this part is important. We need to make sure the sauce reduces enough that when we add the cream doesn't curdle from all the acid. Now that our sauce has reduced quite heavily, I've come back over to the stove and I have about a cup of our heavy cream. Now chances are we won't use all of this. This really comes down to your personal preference. You want to make sure that there's enough cream in the sauce to bite through the acidity, but you don't want to totally lose the fact that this is supposed to be a vinegar sauce. So I think I'll start off adding about half of this. Alright, so the cream is in. I'm just going to start stirring this. And as you can see from the texture of this sauce, because I actually properly reduced the vinegar mixture enough, the cream isn't separating. Now, if your cream does separate though, that's not the end of the world. Just keep cooking it, keep stirring, and eventually things should begin to integrate a bit. Alright, so this is kind of the color that we're left with now. It's still a bit acidic, and I can tell from experience that I want the color a bit lighter than this. But if you're trying this at home, I would suggest you try the sauce with a spoon as you go, and stop where you about like it. So I'll just add a little bit more of the cream, stir that in, and then now this, we want to return to about medium-high heat, and reduce this further as well until it starts to thicken up. After reducing for several minutes, our sauce has reached the desired consistency, and we can tell that by just running a spoon through it and checking the back. We want to make sure that the sauce can actually stay where it is and not drip all over the spoon. If we know that our sauce can coat the spoon, it can coat the food. So the next thing we want to do is take a big handful of parsley chopped up rather fine and add it to the sauce. We don't really want the parsley to cook too much, so we're adding it at the end. But I'll give this a good mix to make sure everything is thoroughly coated in the sauce. Once our parsley's been added, now it's time to bring the chicken back into the pan for the final time. Just want to put the chicken back into the sauce and let it warm back up a bit. And while this is warming, we'll begin getting our plates ready and to finally sit down to eat. Now that we've finished all the steps for our dinner, we can finally sit down and eat. Here, I've served our chicken alongside a hot salad of Brussels sprouts, but you could do anything. More traditional would be rice or mashed potatoes. Now, I know this dish was complex and took a lot of different techniques over several different steps, but I hope it wasn't intimidating. Hopefully this dish can help inspire you the way it did me when I cooked it for the first time several years ago. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time back in my kitchen.